Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. As you may know, I've been working on a new one-on-one course, and it's here. Reignite Your Creative Spark is a private coaching program designed to help creative folks build momentum that lasts so they can turn their creative dreams into reality. In 6 private sessions, you'll discover how to engage with your creative dreams with ease and joy, feeling both more confident in yourself and your work and more vibrant than you have in years. Want to learn more? Use the link in the show notes to get in touch. Talk to you soon. Ellen Kaplan is an actress, writer, and director, and professor emerita of acting and directing at Smith College. She performs and directs internationally in places like Pakistan, China, Israel, Costa Rica, Argentina, and Puerto Rico. And she recently edited the new book, Theater Responds to Social Trauma, Chasing the Demons. Ellen joins me to talk about her work in and out of the classroom, dealing with the shoulds, how easy it is to get in our own way, why we are each a culture unto ourselves, what we've each learned from our students, and more. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Ellen Kaplan. Ellen, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you, Nancy.
So I start everybody off with the same question. Were you a creative kid, or did you discover your creative side later on?
Okay. I come from a somewhat damaged home. I had nobody else in my life, no family besides my very not happy mother, abusive really. And creativity wasn't a word. Nobody spoke about that. But for me, it was escape. I don't know if I was creative or not, but I needed other worlds. I was a voracious reader. I wrote tons, not for anybody else, but I wrote. And I discovered vaguely that I liked being on stage, or I thought I liked being on stage, but I discovered theater. And it was all of it connected to that I tried to run away and did succeed more than once. I mean, it was a place to get out of. And I realized many, God knows how long later, that one of the reasons that I was drawn to acting, part of it is because women, I wouldn't have begun to think that you could direct or anything else, but acting, but was because I needed to feel seen, and heard, which also made me extremely vulnerable and almost panicky. I mean, so it took me years to get past that. I no longer in any way, shape, or form, I haven't been for years. I mean, everybody gets a little stage fright, but that kind of serious, intense need, which then led to a lot of panicking, long ago went away. But it was realizing that was important to me. So I don't even know. I think every human being is creative. I'm not sure what it means. Question is, two questions. How do you express that? What path do you need to take, or paths? What are you trying to do psychologically, spiritually, intellectually? What is it you're doing? And the other sort of path of that, the other part of that is discipline. You can be as creative as you like, and we all are, but if you don't have a craft, a discipline, procedures, then you just are emoting. You're putting things out there, but you're not crafting it. And so its ability to communicate to anybody else is limited. So discipline and procedure on one hand, and the need, the urge. Why are you doing this? Not that you have to have an answers, but that's what propels you. Do you know?
Isn't it so interesting that you don't have to have the answer?
You know, when I get an answer to anything is when it's actually worked its way fully through me after decades. That's when my answers come. Oh, that's why I did that. Not this time.
There's a freedom in that, you know. I think especially when you're young and you kind of have this idea that I want to do this thing, but I want to do it right, you know, and I don't want to mess up. I want to be very serious. I want to be taken seriously. I want to do it right. And we think that we need to know all of these things, but really the doing is so much more important than the knowing.
When I came to Smith, I had already been tenured at Beaver College at the time, Arcadia, as you know, in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And I had taught for 8 years, 10 years really, before I came here. And yet, when I started here, because I had little kids, I said I'd go back to zero with tenure. I had to start again because I wanted to. But I my first semester here with my 4-month-old and my 4-year-old was a disaster for many reasons, but I think I exaggerate, but still the main reason for me was unconsciously I felt I suddenly needed to be an expert because now I was at Smith College. And that notion of expertise left me dry mouthed and utterly like, oh, right, I need to know everything, which of course you don't. But it took me quite a while to work that out. Now you just do what you've been doing and do it more. And
Right. Right. Yeah, no, we get hung up on that stuff.
Yeah, you do.
And it gets in your way. It makes your life more difficult when it doesn't have to. But I think it can be hard to get around that when you think that it does have to be there.
That's right. And that I think comes with the notion of judgment. We're being judged, and of competition, that we're competing for something. And, I'm writing a play now. You don't mind that I wander around, do you?
Not at all.
Okay. So I've written many plays, whatever, but the thing I'm working on now is really about a woman in the last chapter of her life. I'm 71. I'm thinking about it, and it's great, but it's very much a woman who's trying to escape. She takes a little cabin off the coast of Maine while the world is dying around her, and she knows, and the water's rising, and the walls are caving in. But this sense of that. First of all, when I start to write, I don't know where I'm going. But what she is really working through, and the other people in the play, are that your whole life doesn't have to be about producing and consuming and reproducing and pushing and pulling. And I'm just a pretty pressured person, which I'm really trying to let go of that, but and obsessiveness, which can help you in any artistic. But for me, really beginning to disengage from what's expected and from judgment and from all of that has been really, because that becomes toxic. It really does. It is. I think it's a toxic system that we live in that way. But trying to say, right, pull back from that, so that everything doesn't. Yeah, I had a student many years ago who came into an acting one class, and we go around, and why are you here? What are you interested in? She wanted to know, she said, I'm an economics major. I want to know the cost benefit ratio of this class. And I was finally said, nothing. Its value is nothing. You may be in the wrong place because it's not. What can I tell you? It's $3 a credit hour. I don't know. I don't want that.
Yeah, no. And I mean, I think that it does have value, but you can't measure it that way.
And value what? What does that mean in terms of, is it an intrinsic? Of course it does. We could talk forever in terms of what it opens up. But no. We can't help but think of it as putting a dollar amount to it, or putting how will this further my life, my career? And that's very hard to let go of for all of us, Really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And I think, we have a hard time dealing with things that we can't quantify that easily.
We do, yeah.
A really hard time.
I'm clearly I'm way older than you, and I will say so. I grew up, right, I was a child of the 60s, early 70s, certainly involved in left-wing politics, all good, but more important, more to the point at this rate, I think, is that this was a prosperous nation, far more than it is now. And I never thought for a minute, career? Don't know, don't care. Really irrelevant. Marriage, kids, and I'm married, and I have 2 kids. I'm married almost 40 years, but no, I wanted adventure. So I was already like that in the sense that, but I think that a lot of that is sort of the time period, because I see it with my kids. I counseled them, they're in their 30s now, that follow your bliss. And they're like, yeah, Mom, that's great for you, you crunchy hippie. And they got a point. But I feel like this was this pocket in time where it truly didn't matter. I went to California, for example. I mean, I did this all the time. I went cross country. I lost the $15 I took with me, had nothing. I went to California. I had $200, which I promptly gave away to a guy who thought he was the Duke of Edinburgh. But I didn't care. I just moved there with a suitcase and said, now I live here. That can't happen anymore. I don't think. Not easily.
It's harder, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So it's down to what's the number that's going to come out of anything that I do. And right. I think that is really hard for creative folks to let go of.
Yeah.
I think There was an article that I read a couple years ago, and I'll have to see if I can dig it up. I don't know if I remember enough to be able to find it, but it was, if I'm remembering right, it was about somebody who, started doing something for the joy and the fun of it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it was something like pottery, like she was
Yeah,
making mugs or something. And someone persuaded her that she should sell them.
yeah,
And it was all about like the difference between this was fun when I
right.
did it for me. And then when it turned into a business and I had to make mugs and I had to market them and I had to ship them out and all that, it's taken over my life. And where's the fun part now?
Yeah, right.
And I think, I heard a lot when I was a kid that was basically do the things you love as an avocation,
Yeah,
don't do them as a career. And some of that was because you're not going to make enough money to do it as a career,
right.
that whole fear. And and I wonder now, because that was the part that I heard as a kid. But, there is truth to the idea that as soon as you start to turn it into a business,
That's right.
you can lose the part that drew you in the first place because it becomes a have to rather than a get to. And so, yeah, it's an interesting thing to kind of walk that line. If you still want to sell stuff, do you find a different way to do it? Do you make it more ad hoc? I don't know.
I don't know either, but I know that as soon as we commodify ourselves, think of ourselves in that way, and that's I from New York, but I worked in as an actor and as a writer in the city for a number of years, and I eat it. Honestly, loathe the business. Here's my headshot. Here's my selling. I'm selling. I'm selling. I can't do that comfortably. And again, I attribute some of it to really the prosperity in this country until the mid 70s and the equality comparative made it just not essential to think like that. And again, and my parents really were not engaged at all, except to be, my father was gone a lot, my mother was very destructive. So it wasn't like any push to like do things. So it was in a way freeing. In another way, it had plenty of problems. But I think that what you're saying is true. And you bring to mind something that, okay, so I in the last few years, even more than usual, but I write some scholarship besides what I do. I've had a number now of book chapters and essays published. And I just had a book that's like going to come out April 23rd. Yeah. But I a minute to put my thoughts together. Kitsugi. One of the things I write about in one of them, because the book is theater and social trauma, but I deal with creativity and the arts and marginalized and traumatized people. And one of the things is there's a Japanese concept which I hadn't heard of before. Kitsugi, I think, but with pottery, that you leave the cracks in. You don't
Mm-hmm.
try to hide the cracks, and it's beautiful. And to me, that the cracks, the scars, the wounds create and shape us as the individuals that we are. And the notion that, and I do write about value and commodification in that, because the notion that if it's something's cracked or different or whatever, it's not worth as much is quite the opposite. It's worth more because you, or whatever, but you can see the cracks, and I love that. This is who
Right.
we are. We're all.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's when we try to pretend the cracks aren't there that we get in trouble.
Exactly that. Exactly that. And if we could recognize and own our own wounds, the places where we're damaged, which also strengthen us, we could recognize that and not be afraid of others who have whatever their cracks are. We all have them, you know? Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm pontificating, but that's basic.
I mean, it's a reasonable enough thing to pontificate about, you know?
Right.
Because yeah, the whole perfection thing, I mean, I think of it in the sense of all the people who are posting their perfect lives on Instagram
Yeah,
and
right.
making everyone else
Feel terrible.
think that first of all that's real, which how much
Right.
of it is and how much of it isn't, and then they're not good enough because they don't have the house by the beach or the perfect family or whatever it is.
Right.
But there's also that drive for perfection in doing whatever your creative thing is that can stop you before you even get started. I mean,
Right.
one of the things that surprised me the most when I learned about perfectionism in Kaizen Muse training because I was convinced that I was not a perfectionist, right? I was like,
Right.
I am not a neatnik. I do not have my kitchen cupboards organized by like, color or can size or whatever. And that's just not me. I am not a perfectionist, right? And then they said, perfectionism can keep you from getting started because you figure you'll never be able to do it well enough. So why bother trying? And I went,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, crap.
Oh, wow. I guess I am.
Hi. Turns out I am a perfectionist after all. What do I know?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like perfection isn't interesting.
No, it's really not. It shuts us down, but it also asks us to create these conforming things that.
Right.
And there's another side to that. And I want to talk about that for a moment. You make me think, first of all, where I come. I was at an audition 100 million years ago, and I was talking to some guy, and he says, well, I really want to write mystery stories, novels. I'm like, that's great. And he said, well, I know I'll succeed because there are formulas and you follow the formulas. And I thought, well, then why do it? But I didn't say, but right, if you know what's going to happen. But and that makes sense. But the other side is that I don't think of it as perfectionism. For me, it's more obsessive compulsive style that I need to keep, whatever I'm doing, I need it to keep doing it. I need to work. Otherwise I get very, very anxious. That's good in many ways because it means you keep going back and you refine and again, craft and you make better. The other side is that the satisfaction for me comes more from the obsessive compulsive side. I could get the same satisfaction, I think, by lining up all my pens or something. I mean, it's a good quality, but it also has its own destructive thing. And I think that being balanced in our awareness, we write or whatever we do as an expression, a celebration, a questioning the internal reasons we do this. And we get satisfaction that it speaks to others. But if you can't balance that, you need to find the balance, I think, between what I'm calling discipline or craft and the need to express. And both are real and they're intention, but they're important. Mm-hmm. If I start thinking how bad my play is now, I'll never go back to it. But if I keep it might get better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And I think, when I was teaching high school ESL kids, probably the single hardest thing to get through to them was that, okay, you're going to write this essay and then you're going to look at it again and you're going to make it better. And they would just look at me like I had 17 heads and be like, I'm sorry, what? I wrote it. I'm done.
Here it is, right?
It's like, it's done. It is perfect. It is as wonderful as it could ever be. And I know because I did it and it's done.
Yeah.
And
they don't know how to revise and they don't see the purpose of revision. And
no. And yet, nothing is perfect. First of all, very few things are perfect, full stop, but nothing is perfect the first time.
Oh my God, of course not.
Even if you don't know where you're going, and when I write, I don't know where I'm going either.
Right, I don't either.
Because if I did, like you said, why bother?
Right.
Why bother? But then what the biggest thing that I discovered doing my MFA, because that was the first time I ever actually finished writing a novel, was going back through it. And it was great because since I was teaching at the time, I could use my classroom where I had a giant table and I could just spread everything out and kind of like pull up different pieces and hold them up side by side and whatever. But it was like, oh, so here in chapter 3, I said this thing, but over here in, chapter 32, I said something completely different.
Oh, do I know?
So now which one's right? Which one do I go with? What all do I have to change, to make it work? And what questions are there? Because maybe it's trying to tell me something. Maybe it's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's that there's something else going on in here. Maybe it has a different answer. And, because I had really thought okay, I'm going to go through and revise the book. I'm just going to go through and read it, and it'll be like proofreading and, like little copy editing here and there and whatever. That's just not how that works. But it was such a fascinating thing to me. And I realized, that one of the things that I had learned without even realizing that I was being taught in that program was how to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, I never would have thought to ask these things before. But here we are. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but let's figure it out.
I love it. And without a sense of revision that you have to go back and go back. Annie Dillard said something beautiful in one of her books about writing, that you can build a whole house or a whole thing and realize it all has to go, except maybe one brick. And then you start again. I was like, oh my God. But yeah, right now with the play that I'm working on, I've finished. I finished this draft of Act 1. I'm trying to go into Act 2, but I realize in going back over it, I have the same woman. She goes out. Oops, she hasn't come back. Wait, she comes back, but she hasn't been out. And I got to go through it. Wait, when do you leave and why and how? And it's like, this is you're working. You don't, just what you're saying.
Yeah, you don't remember all of it. And up to a certain number of pages, you can reread everything before you start writing again. But eventually,
you got to move on.
You're not going to read 200 pages every morning before that it doesn't work like that. Yeah.
But I think that internal judgment, pressures that we put on ourselves, all those things mitigate against a freer spirit. Mm-hmm. Free Play, which is the name of a book that I love by, I forget who's a brilliant violinist, but his book is, I know it, I just can't think of it now, but it's Free Play, which is really about how in every creative process, what we need is to give ourselves the space to play.
Yeah.
And then, then there's, that's primary process, and there's secondary process, the fraud stuff. But basically, yes, you go back, but if you can't make that space to play in the sandbox, then you're not going to have much to go back to.
Right.
It is whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, you can't play when you're worried about how well everything's going to come out at any given second.
That's hard to get out of our heads. We all do that. We do it all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think, that's part of why I love improv, because it's all first draft.
That's right. That's true.
And I think it puts you back in that frame of mind that you are when you're a little kid. One of my nephews came up to me when we all got together right around his 5th birthday, and he had this Lego creation that was really more or less like a big cube, a little bit more rectangular than a cube, but different colors and whatever. And he came up and he handed it to me and said, "This is a cake."
I love it. Okay.
And I looked at it and I thought, okay, why not? Yes. And, it's like,
yes,
sure.
Exactly.
Let's see what comes out of your cake. And he had no doubt that it was a cake, because he was 5.
I love it. That you just said, I think, which certainly been crucial to my whole life, which is the word yes. Mm-hmm. I'm not very good at thinking through and balancing it. I'm like, go this through the story? Yes. Because underneath all that, if I could say what the biggest driving impulse in me, not the negative, but the positive, is a sense of adventure. I want my life to be an adventure. I really do, before anything. And yes is a great way to do that. Yes, yeah. And of course is exactly the improv way to do it. And you want to put that in your life because, yes, that's the good part. And of course, as the culture gets more just corporate and capitalistic and all that, it's harder and harder to find time and place for that kind of yes, just yes. Yeah, well, fill out this 20-page document of nonsense. Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay. I have to, but okay. Yeah. But I've really come to think that yes and is just a philosophy of life.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly.
The more you can do that, and how much time do most of us spend saying no?
Oh gosh, exactly.
And no is important. Don't get me wrong. There are definite times and places for no, but it's like you really kind of got to look at where and how often you say no and say, what would happen if I said yes to some of these things?
Right. sort of the other side of that. I say yes to almost everything, and my husband, for example, but everybody who knows me, learned to say no. And yes, they're all right. But again, I had to develop my own psychic responses to what I was coming out of, and those were things I decided that. I mean, somebody I remember asked me when I was like 4 what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I know it was like that old because my brother wasn't born yet. I said everything except not a policeman. And that was the only thing I didn't want to be. But I really, that's the part of me that I value. And there's whole other dark clouds of me that I also value because they're me. But
Right.
this is the sunniest part of me. It's like just embrace. Okay. And
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that hopefully, because I've spent a lot of my life now, sort of do conventional theater and I direct and act and do that stuff, or I do that less, but I still do it. But a big portion of what I've done, maybe a third of it, has been work with groups that have no connection to theater, whether it's outside in conflict zones or post-conflict zones, whether in prisons, death row, with adjudicated teens. I mean, this has been a theme for my elders, and I just came back from Pakistan, I suppose, where I was again doing really offering this sort of kindergarten is my year for adults, but like here we're going to make this play. The kids we worked with were just now were graduate students in art and architecture, brilliantly talented, some with theater background, others not, but giving both permission on the one hand, because these kids worked from 9 in the morning till 5:30 at night. I mean, their classes were intense, but permission was one thing and structure was the other. So now
Mm-hmm.
I can do it. How? And how is very light. I mean, you're a wonderful, creative human being with all these accomplishments. The how is I can offer, but I'm not trying to impose it. This is how you
Mm-hmm.
do it. Let's explore. But that permission, I think, especially where it hasn't been offered, is really important part of me to be able to offer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm very curious about, exactly what all you do when you go into places like that and how it goes.
So I'll talk about Pakistan just because I just did it, but I've done this in various ways um for most of my life. So every time is different. A couple of years before that, I worked in Iraq with internally displaced Yazidis who had been subject to a genocide by ISIS, women and girls and young men who've been living in the camps for already 9 years. I mean, these are seriously disadvantaged people. So all I can say is that so I'm talking about two separate things. In Pakistan, I did structured work. We had a performance at the end. In Iraq, I didn't. I responded to the communities that I was with and try to create healing spaces, playful spaces, places to explore some of the things that were coming up for people, and very gently, because some are like seriously, significantly traumatized. And so you want to be very careful. But basically to create spaces where people could explore stories. We did fairy tales. We did intergenerational. What would you imagine? That's your great great grandmother. What would you say to her? What would you
Mm.
ask? All kind of things like that. That's applied theater in Pakistan. And again, these are two different models of kind of the same thing, and I've done them in many places. But in Pakistan, we had a text or a series of texts by an incredible Urdu feminist writer from the 20th century, just died in 19, I don't know, 92, I think. But anyhow, and we took her work and we chose 5 stories. And then I started with adaptations for each group. And then they reworked or worked it as I had it or reworked it. And we improv, we explored. Then they were responsible for writing the final scripts, which were in Urdu and English, which was great. And then together, so we adapted, we staged that and then performed it for a large audience, which was really, and it was beautifully done. So these are two different ways of working, but both of them are saying, um, well, with where people are, whoever you are, what are you in that you meet people where they are. I had done work, if forgive me for going on about this, but
No, it's fine.
I had done work in Bosnia. I was invited by my director friend, who was herself invited by a group of women survivors and wanted to tell their stories. So I did that, and together she and I created a play that we then did based on the words of these women. But a few years later, I was I did a series of workshops for pre-GED students, people who don't have their GED, most of them high school, not everybody, in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which itself is a hugely beleaguered city. So what I did was I used parts of the play to look at these kids had not only never heard of Bosnia, they didn't know where Yugoslavia had been. They didn't know, they'd never heard of, I mean, this is like, they live in, and we've made comparisons between what they endure in many ways in Holyoke and what they saw and how they want to change and what happened in Bosnia and where is Bosnia. And we created improvs, but it was a way of exploring a world that's very different theirs, but also it has parallels. And so I'm saying each group is different. Each place you work is different. Um, I we created a devised piece. I lived in Israel during the Second Intifada. I'd been there just twice before that, and then several times since. But one of the things, because I was there to observe and to work on primarily peace and reconciliation efforts, but they completely collapsed. It would be like doing that now. Oh, fine, let's have peace efforts. Maybe not. I sure learned a lot, but I worked with 4 women, other artists, dancer, actor. They all had different backgrounds. And we created a piece together called Manicure, basically as our responses to knowing that our kids could die, because we'd hear it. I mean, I watched tanks go by. I heard a bus blow up. So that was a way of responding to that situation. We did it in one of the women's basements. They'd have a basement, but like a basement, a den, I guess. But I guess what I'm saying is that this theater has been, for me, my way of healing for myself, my way of exploring. And I try to offer what I know as a toolkit to the situation that I'm in. So I don't have an answer to how I work. It's always different.
It's always different. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense. But still, it must be fascinating and I hope really gratifying.
Yes. Yes. And I am not likely to do another long trip or it's too hard on my body at this point, which is fine because there's plenty to do here. And I don't mean plenty to do as community service work. I mean, I follow my instincts. One is right now, I'm volunteering as much as I can for Democrats in North Carolina because God knows we need it. Secondly, seriously, so that has no theater and I don't care. It's just where I feel I'm needed. On the other hand, there is a theater group here. I have connections to North Carolina and I had come down here at that time. My son is living here now, and that's why we moved here. But he was here and I came to see him. But I also was doing my death row work at that point. And I met a company, the artistic director of a company here, Hidden Voices, who does this all the time, works with life without parole and people on death row. I met a guy, came to talk to this guy who was on death row, who is amazing. He's used his time productively to become extremely a wonderful artist and deeply insightful. So he was amazing. But my point is that once I finish up other projects, I will contact them again because I'd like to do work with them if possible. I just met them. I was just here visiting at the time. But I just, like I said, I follow my nose. I'm like, oh, that's something I would like to do. And so is, the Democrat stuff. So I don't know. I don't know what I'll do. I know I won't be taking endless trips to Pakistan. It's too far. That's basically it.
So when you say you follow your nose, is that how, you started out acting? Is that how you ended up trying directing, even though you'd have at first thought that was not going to be available to you?
Oh, well, it was more pragmatic than that. It never occurred to me to direct. It never occurred to me to do much of anything. Acting, I followed. I understood in my path. Serendipity, things keep coming. I said, do that. But when I got my first teaching job, which was right out of graduate school, I was to act and direct. I was teaching acting and directing. I did one show a semester all for years. And the first thing I did was I directed both Electra and Bye Bye Birdie a week apart. Right? I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I had to learn. I really had one class. I didn't know anything about directing. I mean, I did, but I didn't know that I knew it. And I dove in. So I didn't plan on directing. I just had to. And then I found, well, I enjoyed it because honestly, for a lot of reasons, but for one thing, I was I felt less physically on the line than I
Mm.
did as an actor. So it was like, great. But then I'd have shows and they'd come up and I was just as nervous and just, so then I started writing and I mean, I've always written, but I started writing plays. So I don't know. I didn't say, I'm going to be a director. Now, in retrospect, I don't know if I wish I did. That's silly. I like what I do and I like what I've done. But I wasn't thinking ever until I got to Smith College after about careers or what all of that meant. And I will tell you something. When I first came here to Smith, I retired, but I was teaching acting as I do. And I also, as I said, I had a 4 month old. I mean, by the time this happened, he was probably 6 months old or 8 months old, and a 4 year old, and a husband that I totally uprooted and was not sure he wanted to be here at all. And got real depressed. And I remember bathing Daniel, the baby, and getting a call from one of my students. It was 11 o'clock at night, and my phone is like this, right? We didn't have cell phones then. My phone is on my shoulder. And as I'm trying to bathe him, she's telling me that she was a dance major, but maybe she should also be a theater major, but she also wants to be a senator. So I was like, and then I'm like, I can't sew a button at this point in my life. I'm like, wow. I'm like, yes, that's great. But I mean, I understand the spirit, but she was saying, well, so what courses should I take? And what do I do to accomplish all this? And I was like, jump in the nearest lake. No, that's me, Mom. It was not part of the way I looked at things until
Mm-hmm.
and Smith is an excellent, wonderful school, and it was right, but and this was the 90s by then, and things were changing in the sense that, and also Beaver, I had most of my students were first time college students in their family, and many of them had babies. They come to my class, of course, I bring mine, but they were single mothers. But it really changed at Smith, what the atmosphere was. And for the worse, for the better, I don't know. It was just really different. And I had to recalculate who I was and why I was doing what I was doing.
I bet.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the right question for that? Like, I'm wondering, like how long did it take to recalculate? It had to have been rather improvised.
I was there for 30 years. I taught at Beaver 8 years before that because I was tenured. And before that, I had a full teaching scholarship to get my MFA in North Carolina. So I've now taught for 40 years. And all I can say is that periodically I'd have a dark night of the soul and go, why the hell am I doing this? What am I doing? What is it? And it would come up every few years. And the last one that I remember concretely was, well, I know what I'm doing. It's called the production of joy. I want to make joyful spaces.
Mm.
And that was enough of an answer for me. Before that, it was to learn to be a better artist. That was why I taught. Before that, I had some other reason. I have no idea. But in terms of, I've just never been very clear about what I should be doing career wise and what to do. I don't understand it. I sort of shrink from it. And I'm like, but I like what I do. So I'll just do what I do. Now I I went to a writing retreat, and a couple of people there clearly did not like the piece I brought. I mean, they didn't see much. And I remember in my awful mood saying to him, I've made $10,000 as a writer so far. He was like, who gives a damn? What are you telling me? But that was how I could prove to him and myself, really, I can write. I was like, it was really stupid. I don't care if you won the Publishers Weekly Clearinghouse thing.
Right.
That was about what I was saying. This has been my profession, but it's been a profession because it has happened. I can't say beyond that. I mean, okay, I'm going to have to because I need to think about it. So when I started, I went after college, having no plan. I went with my $200 in my suitcase to San Francisco. And I had a great old time for a couple of years and just auditioning and doing and whatever else I did there. I don't know, but I had a lot of fun. But finally, it occurred to me that San Francisco, at least in the 70s, was not a place to actually do much as an actor. I mean, you could, but there was a professional work. I couldn't get training. So I went back to New York. And I got a job as a writer, a full-time freelance professional writer, which I loved. So why I'm saying that things like that happened. I didn't really plan much. I got back to New York. I got my job as a writer. I got a fabulous teacher. And then I'd audition and I'd get things. So I get things and I do them. The job allowed me to be away for a year, allowed me to be away for 10 weeks. It was really 11 years of like, just do what you're doing and then come back, go back to the project. So these things happen. Then another inflection point. I was not wanting to be in New York anymore. The job where I worked, they wanted me to become production manager. The guy that I've been studying with wanted me to come to North Carolina to get my MFA, and I wanted to move to Seattle because I said, right. And I didn't know what to do. So all of these things, I was like, okay, North Carolina. I did not, I got an MFA because I was invited and they could pay me. I had no money. So it was like all of that, like that. I got a job teaching because my boyfriend at the time had a resume service. And so he said, well, here's a resume. And I had great credentials, and I'll send them out for you. I was like, fine. So I got like 5 interviews and then at this job. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't have a plan. I never have.
Yeah.
But I've been a lucky person with some abilities. That's all. I don't know. It's useless. I realize this, follow your bliss. I don't know, but I know that I care. I'm very curious and I need to work. Those two things together, and work for me is about self-expression on some deep level. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me wonder if someone had sat you down and said, you must come up with a career plan. I can't imagine how well that would have gone.
Oh, for God's sake. My career plan was to not go to college. It was to join the Weathermen, who were the very radical group that I knew. I mean, honestly, the thing that turned me off from that, first of all, was that, I shouldn't say that. Okay, I'm going to say this, but this is what you should put. The people I knew had a commune in Queens. They said, well, yes, if you want to join, I mean, a bunch of people living in an apartment, you want to join, you have to have a bisexual experience. And I was like, I was 19. I said, that's not going to happen. To myself, I said that. So I went to college. I had nothing else to do. They had already gotten weirder and weirder until the days of rage. And several of them got life sentences. I'm really glad I didn't do that. But a career, that's what I thought my career would be, was being a disruptive leftist because I had no brains. I didn't know what I was talking about. But I mean, seriously, I have been very lucky. But no, career, acting was, I never had, oh God, I had an agent ask me once, you go and, and they invite you in and you do your little, I did a couple of monologues for him. He said, well, tell me, are you going to be a star? And I was taken aback and went, no, which is not what you say to the guy who wants to be your agent. I was like, of course not. And it's true, I would, but that was the end of that interview. So I don't know. But remember, I had to reconstruct myself from a home that was toxic, from a time that was very permissive, and from really an attitude that didn't take formal education seriously at all. As I said, I've read tons. I still do. But no, my life led me to a place that was lucky, because I sure as hell didn't know what I was doing, except I had to. Inner push, I had to do things.
Mm-hmm.
That makes any sense.
Yeah. I think life led you to where you needed to be.
Oh, yeah. No, I believe that. At each step. It's just, if it was a plan, it wasn't a conscious plan because I had no idea.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I'm just thinking, that people think now that you have to have a plan for everything. And I wonder how much serendipity we miss because we think we have to be directing everything ourselves.
Again, balance, because I think that my counsel to my kids, just do what you want. Follow your beliefs. That's Joseph Campbell. Was like, my son, maybe not, Mom. Better rethink that. But so I do believe that. But I also really trust that we go where we need to be, that if we allow ourselves, that's what, the other thing, and again, you can put this in, I don't care, but I'll say it anyway. I have always visualized pretty strongly. And one of the things that I visualized was I would see myself in, I don't know, 5 years hence, I would see myself and those things would happen. I saw myself in San Francisco before I ever dreamt I was going there. I did. I saw the apartment. I saw the person. I saw myself on a college campus before I had any clue that I was going to do that. And I believe we all have those. I think they're just extensions of our intuition. Many of the things I saw were not so blissful. They expressed some horrors and hatreds, but they also expressed some dreams and some hopes. And I think it's really just cluing into what's already in there in all of us, some visual, some, I don't know how people see it, but that's what I think has guided me. An inner compass that has needed to say in the world who I am inside, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to give a talk at Smith once, a small thing, but they were asking, what is education for? And I had to say, I didn't have a clue. I really didn't know until I was in graduate school that there was any purpose to it, to school. And then I explained why I think it's really a good thing now. And I really, really do. I wish I knew that stuff earlier, but you're right. You get where you need to be. You do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting to me because the planning advice is, I mean, you got your parents, like you said, you were 4 when they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right. And you come up with an answer, and if everybody likes it, you run with it. Right. At least for a while when you're 4 or 5 or whatever. And then eventually, you end up with a guidance counselor in middle school or in high school, and your guidance counselor wants you to, not only to know what you want to do, but how you're going to get there. And your parents want to know that too. And, everybody starts asking you that question, right? And then, you go and you do the thing and, be like, what? I'm not anti-planning at all.
Right.
But I also know that you can have the greatest plan in the world and be halfway through it and find out, you know what? This is not actually for me. I mean, I started undergrad in a 5-year arts and engineering program.
Oh my gosh.
Because I thought I wanted to be an engineer, even though I hated math. So, yeah. Right? What could possibly go wrong?
Right.
And it was actually calculus that did me in. Yeah. But, I did it for a semester. And at the end of the semester, it was pretty clear that if I was going to pass calculus, it would literally be by the skin of my teeth. And I did not. And so that was sort of the end of the idea that Nancy was ever going to be an engineer. I loved the idea of it. Right. You get to create all these cool things, and design stuff and whatever. But yeah. And yet if I had actually spent my whole childhood thinking that I was going to be an engineer, which I had not. It was a fairly recent idea, should probably have been the first clue.
Right.
Thinking that was what I was going to do. And then, had that same experience. I was in the arts and engineering thing, so it was easy. I just dropped the engineering part and kept the English side. Right. Go. But if that hadn't been it, if I was there just to be an engineer, right, and it became very clear over the course of that first semester that engineering was not actually the right place for me, I mean, that's a huge internal crisis.
Yeah.
It's like, who the heck am I? I thought I was this one thing, and now it turns out I'm not. So what am I instead? I mean, it seems to me like, yes, we should be asking these questions and teaching kids to plan and all that kind of stuff. But we leave out the what if it doesn't work part.
Right.
And we leave out the more intuitive side. And, because if I had listened to an intuitive side, I might have realized a little sooner that was not what was going to happen.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I mean, my God, when you're at school and you're 18 in your first year and the whole plan has just fallen to pieces. Yeah. And then on top of that, you could have the parents who are saying, I told you to study harder. This is because you didn't study hard enough.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it can be disastrous if you don't know how to, like you say, how to balance all of that and how to say, okay, this is what I thought, but that's not it. So now what? And how to pick up from that.
Well, you make me think about the shoulds, and let me explain. And I've never realized this before as a blessing, but it was my parents didn't ask me where I wanted to be. They didn't care at all. My mother, for me, she hated me forever since I'm little. My father was never home. So between the two, fine. I remember this, but it was a stranger or a relative. We don't really have them, but somebody asked me. But I say that, and also in terms of the only career advice they ever gave me was to send me to typing school. Remember, I grew up in I was born in 52. My brother, who needed it, I'm delighted, I'm glad, but it was a great deal I mean, he went to private schools, he went to this, that, all the things they paid substantially towards his advanced education. Not for any reason, he really needed it. I don't begrudge it at all. But for me, I've always seen that with a degree of resentment, but in fact, there's a whole other side. I had an enormous amount of freedom and no shoulds. There were no shoulds. My guidance counselor sent me to a shrink because I was tripping. I mean, and I had to tell her, and she said, "What?" I said, "Acid." "What?" "LSD." "Oh my God, you need a psychiatrist." Nobody talked. And then I got kicked out of that high school not too long afterwards. I mean, I was suspended and then they saw whatever, and then I got kicked out. But my point is, in a way, I mean, nobody should ask for this kind of ruthlessness. I don't think that. But I in no way felt that it mattered to anybody but me. And there was no reason I would feel that. And to the extent that it did, a girl should learn to type, and that's it. I mean, really, that was it. It wasn't married, no, get married. I mean, that was it. So I can, my father had a store, which ultimately went bankrupt. But their plan for my future was that Howard and I, my brother, would take over the store, something I couldn't be less interested in than Howard. So, in a sense, but I think why this is applicable in larger ways is the should. I didn't have any shoulds. I had a lot of no's, but no shoulds. And knowing that a should is not a bad thing to a certain limited extent, but that it can be really paralyzing. And so, if I can offer my path at all, because it's really not a path anybody's going to follow deliberately, believe me, but, trust a chance, have parents who couldn't care less. I mean, this is not going to work. But for me, if I could balance, and I think I have successfully in many ways balanced the lack of should with should. There are things you should do. You have a deadline, you should do that. You have whatever it is, you should contribute. You should be a moral person. Those are inner shoulds. I mean, my father was a great guy. I don't want to, he was just an ordinary guy. He just had to work all the time, and it was impossible to be around my mother. So it's not that. It's just, I think that you're really making me feel kind of happy about the path I've taken, which I never really thought about before. But yeah. No, should can be utterly strangulating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So freedom.
Yeah. And what's interesting about should is how often we don't notice them.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
You don't realize if you've grown up in a family where the expectation is that you're going to take over the business, it probably was never even said you should do this. It was just, this is what's going to happen. It's just in the air you're breathing,
Right.
And I think even with ourselves, we don't always notice.
Absolutely.
I really don't want to do that thing, but I should.
Right.
And it makes a huge difference. If you're saying, especially if you're saying it that way, if you're saying, "Oh, but I should,"
right.
It's probably trying to tell you something.
That's right. And, I think I'm thinking about something very specific. So I got back from Pakistan, and I've been retired well over a year, but I haven't stopped working. But when I came back, I was very sick for a couple of weeks. And so that's like the middle of March, right? I had a parasite. It was awful. Oof. That said, that now it's April 2nd, and the last week or so, I'm like, all right, so you're better. You've done your work. So get out of bed. You should get up and do things. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to. And should is a good thing, but if you can balance it, go, yeah, but you don't have to. So take a look, take a think. Should is good. It makes me get up and do things. On the other hand, too much should makes me completely out of touch with myself. So again, all of a sudden I'm the least balanced person you'll ever meet. But that's not true. But all of a sudden I'm seeing that a little bit of salt and pepper, a little should, a little you don't have to. It's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about balance, really.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, almost anything is all about balance. You don't want
It's
too
true.
much of any one thing. It's where
Right.
you tend to get in trouble.
Yeah, and that's our locomotion through life. We have to be balanced in order to move. So yeah, this is a whole new concept to me. I've never thought I was balanced, but I'm like, wait, that it's true. No, I think I'm finding this a really lovely talk. I really am. Nancy,
Me
thank you,
too.
because it's making me reflect in a way that I haven't before. And I hope it's of some interest or value, but it's really very useful to me. And I thank you for that.
Good. And I think it will be. I think it will be to a lot of people, especially the people who are drowning in shoulds or,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
think that everything has to be planned out and all of that.
When I mentioned coming to Smith with the babies and stuff, my first thing, I may have said this, I hope I'm not repeating myself, was, well, now that I'm at Smith, I better be an expert. And that was the worst instruction I ever gave to myself. So after teaching for 10 years, I came in going, okay, now I'm an expert because I'm at this fancy place. And it was hard. Like finally I went, no, I'm no expert. Nobody is. We're all, but that on my shoulder, that's when should really kicked in. I was like, wow, that's horrible. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because you need experts. You need people who, know a lot about things. But at the same time,
but that as a pressure on yourself, it's not necessary.
there was one other thing I was thinking. Just because I know when I was teaching, I always said I learned more from my students than I had a feeling they learned from me. And since you have taught for such a long time, I'm wondering, what did you learn from your students, especially that you didn't expect?
That is a great question. And like I have this Rolodex of faces going through my head. Well, this one, which is wonderful. I think that a lot of it was how fresh, refreshing, how alive they became. Many, not everybody, but when they approach so much with an earnest openness, a curiosity. And I feel like that in the best circumstances, they appeal to a child in me. Now, they're not children. I mean, these are adults. I don't mean that, but theater is a kind of childish space in some ways. So I learned that. I learned tons over the years. I mean, recently in the last few years, I learned about pronouns. That sounds stupid, but it's not. I learned how important I learned that very specifically from students who worked on me with that, how important it was to be able to identify in the world in a way that was validated. I never would have thought of it. Many things I learned, I didn't, but I keep trying to learn to stop being such a stickler for grammar of all the idiotic things. I mean, seriously, what beyond that, I learned as so much. I can't even, I learned, I directed Curious Incident of the dog in the nighttime. And it's about autism, and my lead and most of the people in it were on the spectrum. And I learned so much about other ways of approaching the world, trusting that there's not one way to skin a cat, an awful expression. But so I guess what I'll say, I think without knowing it, I learned many pathways, the kinds of frames of knowledge that Howard Gardner talks about, how different kinds of learning. And I learned it imperfectly because there are students, many students with so many stronger ways of learning, that kinesthetic and musical and all things. I am pretty proficient verbally, but there are so many other paths, and trying to learn and open myself to not knowing and to saying, well, how do you do that? It's been very hard, but that's the kind of thing. I mean, I can give you lots of specific instances, but those in the larger sense, learning other ways of being freshly and curiously.
Yeah. Yeah. Which teaching is one of the rare fields where you really get exposed to those things.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Do you find that? I want to ask you the same question. What have you found in teaching?
Well, when I was teaching, I was teaching ESL kids. They were mostly from Korea and Taiwan.
Uh-huh.
Occasionally, we'd have one from Japan, Thailand, Germany, Russia, Poland. Um, so a lot of it was cultural.
Uh-huh. Right.
Like, I had no idea that there is a huge culture around convenience stores in Taiwan. But
Really?
there is,
Wow.
are you the 7-Eleven fan? And they have 7-Eleven there, I'm pretty sure, or
Yeah.
because I don't know what else they have. Like, are you a dedicated Wawa kind of guy?
Wow. Yeah.
And it's like there's one on every corner. So it's a thing, and I didn't know about like the plastic surgery culture in Korea,
Oh, yeah.
all of these things. And not even those are kind of, bigger, random, almost factoid kind of things by comparison, but just, one of the biggest things that I learned, and I talked about this with Alex Poppy the other week, was like, yes, as a teacher, I can make a phone call, or since, this was overseas, send an email home to mom and
Uh-huh.
dad because their kid is slacking off or a behavior problem or whatever. And that will fix the problem.
Hmm.
But if like, it has to be the last ditch
Yeah.
nuclear option,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I would see kids come back in the day after I sent something and they
Oh,
were so different. And it was like, okay, I was not needing to like make you terrified and kill your spirit.
right.
And I don't know what happened in the conversation that came after that email, but holy cow, I don't, I want you to be you. I just need you to, do your thing. And that was, I mean, I was there from 2001 to 2009. So there wasn't
Mm,
so much conversation about things like neurodivergence and
right.
autism and ADHD and whatever that may have factored into all of that. So that was not something that we were even taking into consideration. But it was just like, yeah, the conversation with mom and dad is the last conversation you want to have. It's, try absolutely everything before that.
There's a key in the center of what you're saying, aside, absolutely, I agree. But in a way, when you're talking about different cultures, what you made me realize, and I think over 40 years of doing this, I've gotten better at, is really embracing each student as if they are their own culture. In other, not
Mm.
that they, of course, you're Korean, you're Vietnamese, you're Jewish, whatever you want, but when I meant each individual human, I realized that I've spent a lot of my life believing that, well, my way is right and everyone's like me.
Yeah.
Neither is true.
Yeah.
And more than I care to admit, I didn't realize how much I carried that. Well, of course, this, that. And each and every student, really, person, is a culture unto themselves, embedded
Yes.
in a larger, we're women, and then there's race and ethnicity and religion and culture and geography. All of those are real. But there's also within that like a nest of Russian dolls and
Mm-hmm.
affected by the larger, but really saying, yes, I accept you as, I want to know about you and
Yeah.
as your own culture, as really who you are, an individual. And I don't think, in retrospect, that I've been nearly as good at that as I would have liked to be because I really had this unconscious belief. Well, of course, I know the way to think.
Right.
Of
Right.
course, we all think like me. We don't.
Yeah. I think I would be much better at that now than I was then,
Yeah.
especially because, when you take on the mantle of teacher,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of authority and supposed assumed expertise that comes
That's
with
right.
that. And you think because you are the teacher, you are the adult in the room,
That's right.
that therefore you know better than everybody else in the room. And you don't necessarily. You are just as imperfect as everybody else in that room, and you're all trying to do the best you can. And so, so much better to sit down with that kid who is an issue for whatever reason and say,
Yeah.
hey, tell me what's going on. How can I help? What do you need? Rather than you're a problem, I'm calling mom and dad.
Right. And I realize as you're saying it, how much I've not so much called mom and dad as not really. There were students that I didn't know how to meet where they were because I assumed where they were didn't make any sense. And,
Right.
and I was like, that's ridiculous. But I want to tell you something specific about this. One of the last things I did before I retired was during the pandemic, of course, and I directed not viral, what's it called? The online, whatever, version of Julius Caesar. I had 72 different students all over creation. Part of it, it was huge.
Wow.
And it was both a class and a production, an online production. I was very, very thrilled with it, very happy with it. But the classes, because the production took so much work, I was not with most of the students regularly because we worked in rehearsals, but I was occasionally, and I tried very hard to work on to offer Shakespeare. We looked at very many multicultural, multiracial approaches to Shakespeare, and just because I want to. But in the last class, and ultimately they were asking me questions, and I asked them questions, and what I said, how it came about, is more like this. What's always drawn me to acting, and this is true, is getting rid of yourself, is transforming yourself, is yourself draining away. And I couldn't understand that this really isn't what they think of as acting at all until one student who's become a good, close friend of mine, we're very close. She's a young Black woman, gay woman. A whole story. I mean, it could come from a different world, more of a different world than I do. That adopted originally from Ethiopia, a whole thing. And she said to me, and she said, well, that's not what we care about. And I said, what? I don't understand. How could you want to be an actor, not want to be someone else? She said, no, we care about who we are, our identity. I want to know more of who I am. And if it hadn't been her who said it, I would have just said, yeah, well, you're older. I wouldn't have said it. I would have thought, yeah, well, you missed the best thing about theater. But of course, I wouldn't have said that. But that's where I come from. You do this so that you can not be yourself. What a relief. It's a different time. 70, whatever, 50 years have moved since I've embraced this. And she taught me how little I understand of why other people do this. Now, I mean, obviously, I do spend 40 years getting to know my students, pretty many of them. So it's not like I was oblivious to this. It was such a stark difference. My way isn't right. It's what I did. And it is certainly a path through acting, but it's not so relevant to most of my students. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it just was such a wow. There's a whole other way to do this. I never even thought of it. It's really so.
Yeah. That's why I like to say there is no right way. There's just your way.
Yeah.
The way that works for you is the right way for you.
I wish I'd known that more. I really do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with that example. I can see, that in both cases, even though you're coming at it from a different angle, it's kind of both apply.
Yeah.
No matter how, you were trying to get rid of yourself, but in the process, undoubtedly learned more about who you are.
Exactly.
And vice versa. I'm not sure you can have the one without the other there.
That's right. I like that. I sell myself short because I actually had many close relationships with many students, but there's so many that I didn't get. I just didn't get them. And now looking back, I go, because it's a whole other set of values, not like inhumane, not bad values, just other priorities. Oh. Yeah. And regardless of where I knew and where I didn't, the thing is that learning that and saying, right, everybody is shaped by so many things, and respecting that fully requires listening.
Yes. Yes.
And humility, which is.
Yes.
It's true. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And all of those things are why everyone is a culture unto themselves.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I could go back to teaching. No, I really don't. Plenty of luck. No, I like this.
But I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah,
so
me too.
Thank you so much for coming and talking with me today. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, Nancy, you're great.
That's our show. Thanks so much to Ellen Kaplan for joining me and to you for listening. Please leave a review for this episode. You'll find a link right in your podcast app, and in it, tell us about a time when you got in your own way. If you enjoyed our conversation, I hope you'll share it with a friend. Thanks so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.